Life is full of choices, so let's explore the best ways to thrive. This is a Connecting You podcast, hosted by me, Myra Richards, and my marketing director, Emily Robinson. Tune in to discover a healed, healthy, and purposeful life.
We are in season 5 of the Connecting You podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you are new here, Myra is a licensed therapist in Georgia. This season, we wanted to talk about things that we had been avoiding as we wanted to grow with the podcast and our conversations with each other before we tackle the harder stuff. What truth are we going to uncover today in the Hard Truths season?
Today we're going to talk about grief. This is a topic that is very close to both of us. Emily's dad passed away when she was 10. My mom passed away 2.5 years ago. I do a lot of grief counseling in general, so I wanted to dive deep into it. And you'll get some practical tools of what to do if you're going through a season of loss.
The reason that we came up with this topic of hard truths, like grief, single parenting, divorce, anger, what connects all of these difficult things is that it follows you everywhere. That is so true, especially with grief, is this thing that is on your mind, on your heart, that just goes with you wherever you go, and dealing with that is so important.
At least with grief, it's never going to go away. When my mom passed away, I'm also young. You were a child. You became part of this club, this unspoken club where a person whose parent has passed away when they're at a young age, or a child with losing a parent. You're this community that you never knew that you had, and a club that you've never wanted to be a part of, and yet you find yourself there one day. What do you do with that, right?
My dad passed quite unexpectedly. It's very isolating because as a child, you don't know how to talk about these things. You don't know what you're feeling, how to work through anything. You don't know anything, right? Actually focusing in on these topics and knowing, even if you're not the one grieving, like how to be there for someone who is grieving is a big part of life.
What's interesting of what you just said is that you might not have gone through a huge loss of losing somebody, but I do believe the more and more I sit with somebody in counseling, the more I encounter that we're all grieving something. It relates to all aspects of life, whether you're grieving losing a job or your child transitioning from being a baby to a toddler. There are so many seasons in life that we don't recognize they are grieving seasons in order to step into the fullness of what's next.
Mm-hmm. As you said, it's something of an initiation. Like once you have that, you have a broader perspective on how to go through everything else. As a therapist, what's the difference between grief and sadness? Is there one?
As a person who has struggled with depression in the past, as a person who's been sad in the past, grief is the feeling of deep depression, a mourning of something, a desire for something to be a different way. When my mom passed away, I just wanted it every day to not be. It's this feeling of wanting to just erase. Even your mind can't comprehend that. I sit with clients and I say, the hardest part, all of it is hard, but the hardest part for me and the grief of it was having to retell my brain what had happened because it just could not comprehend it. I would wake up and I would be like, oh, it's Thursday, mom's coming over. Oh no, she's gone. It's that pain of having to tell yourself that over and over until 6 months, up to a year or more if you don't deal with it later. Then it's like your brain finally recognizes, oh, okay. When your dad passed away, I remember, oh, there's my uncle driving, and then being like, oh, no, that's not him.
When my dad died, I did immediately feel that he was gone. Very cut and dry. It bothered me that people would try to soften it in my mind through saying like passing away or in a better place. And I'm like, no, he's dead. When my aunt, your mom, I still feel like she's around. I still try to call her and stuff like that. As we were trying to say earlier, grief comes in these waves and it's nonlinear, and you have to go through the different stages of the challenge. So what does that practically look like?
I want to touch on that. I think developmentally too, you were 10. Developmentally is a black and white thinking at that stage of life. So of course you were like, no, this isn't gray. This isn't like another life or just a passing of someone. This is a death, which makes a lot of sense. And now that you're older, you've gone through something horribly similar, and your brain is more able to be like, okay, what is the grayness of death? Especially of loss. Definitely not linear. People want it to be a certain way. And the question I get asked the most is, hey, how long is it going to take? Not because I didn't love the person, but because you're in so much pain that you just want it gone. Who wants to be in pain? Nobody. And they want it to be, okay, I've already went through anger, I already went through acceptance, so does this mean that tomorrow I'm going to be fine? And I have to say, no, it comes in waves. Sometimes people are talking about their moms, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I have to excuse myself and go to the bathroom and cry it out. And sometimes people can talk about their moms, and I'm totally fine. You never know when it's going to hit you. Grief brings you back to the present so often.
Grief is the opportunity to love again. Each time is the memory of love. It's a really good way to reframe it because you're feeling so horrible.
And you are because you loved this person so much that you don't want them gone.
Are the 5 stages of grief useful for us or helpful to understand?
I think so. Let's name the stages. There's anger, acceptance, denial, bargaining,
Depression.
It's helpful because they come and then you realize that, oh, this is part of it, right? The first 6 months, I didn't realize I was angry until I would lash out all of a sudden. It was because I wasn't really crying. I just kept going. I had a little one at that time. I just kept going. And then I would lash out and I was like, what is going on? And then it helped me have some grace for myself. Not to stay in that anger, not to continue to lash out kind of grace, but the grace of being like, oh, Myra, like you make a lot of sense and there's compassion for that time. That's where you're at right now. You can't be anywhere else, right? And acknowledging that, acknowledging the depression of it, acknowledging what acceptance looks like for you. It's not just saying, oh yeah, it's fine. I accept it and I'm moving on. For me, at least, it's accepting that I will forever carry this pain with me.
It doesn't make sense, right? Anger specifically, the rest are expected. There's denial and bargaining.
Yeah.
None of that is necessarily hurtful to others, and they don't really have to understand, because the thing about grief, your life keeps going. You have to keep going to school or you have to keep going to work. That's the hardest part, because you don't get to just sit there and do nothing for 3 weeks. But why would you say that it comes at this time? What is the tie between anger and sadness?
Well, unresolved sadness that leads to depression actually becomes anger. That is one of the symptoms. It's not in the DSM, but I truly believe when people come in and they talk about their anger and they're like, I need to work on this, the underlying deeper root is usually depression about something, because it hasn't been dealt with. Suppressed emotions in your body that are trying to get out, right? They're trying to be like, I'm trying to survive and I don't know how. This is the only way that I do know how. Anger also makes sense. I can't imagine of a death that you're going to be like, oh yeah, that was totally justified. The injustice of it, some of it can be righteous anger in the fact that there's an injustice to it. Like, what is the justice in losing a parent at 10 years old? Was it fair that I lost my mom within 3 weeks of knowing she was diagnosed with cancer? There's no reasoning, and we want to control, we want to figure out the reason, and because we can't find it, our emotions just go crazy and they are released in anger.
What can we do to cope with this? What is like the way to go as a counselor?
You have to feel it. Most books will tell you have to feel it. There is a time you will feel it if you are allowing yourself to. There's a time people will try to give you books. I mean, and that is so kind. It's still not time for me. I still love those books, and yet I left them on my side table. One day I'll be able to read them, but right now I'm in it. There's no way. I want you to know that there is a time for everything. Allowing yourself to feel the feeling whenever it pops up, and surround yourself with people, with community, even with your spouse. I found myself trying to hide my sadness from my spouse because I didn't want him to be sad, or because I wanted my daughter to have one parent who was happy. It was very lonely. I learned pretty quickly that people want to be in it with you. They don't want you to feel this horrible thing by yourself. Counseling is another tool. In most of grief counseling, you have to know it's just you going in there crying, and what I did, whining about it and fighting with the counselor about how unfair this is. There's zero solution except that you're getting everything out that you wouldn't typically say. For me, being a Christian, I can't just go around telling everybody how angry I am at the Lord, how for 9 months I was angry at God. I wanted to walk away, and the only thing that kept me being faithful to God was that my mom had a really strong legacy of prayer and of faith, and that's what kept me going. I can't just say that to everybody because it scares people when you're that honest. Counseling helps you be completely where you're at. The counselor's not going to ask you to change your mindset, especially within the first year. Nothing's supposed to change. Like, you are supposed to feel what you feel. If anger is like lashing out, then it will help you figure out other ways, like journaling, letters to the person who passed. It's helpful. You'll usually feel some type of guilt because we as humans think that we can control everything. So we'll think, if I would have called her one last time, this wouldn't have happened. I feel so guilty. There's a guilt that comes with it, no matter what. Ultimately, the hope is that you are surrounded with people who love you and who can tell you, hey, that makes sense, what you're saying, but that's not true.
The difficult part, particularly in the early stages of grief, is isolation, the idea that you want to hide. For example, that's why I hate funerals, because they are sad, but particularly because they are public. I don't like that because it's just everybody watching you grieve. Getting over that hump of it's okay for people to see that I'm sad is big, something that you can admit to yourself, because otherwise you are going to be very alone.
Yes. Even in shifting your perspective into it's okay for people to see that I'm sad, and it is okay for people to see that I've loved, and I've loved really deep.
So in these darkest of times, where can we find the hope in this story to keep going?
Hope is knowing two things. It's knowing you're going to be okay. You really are going to be okay. Life will continue to move forward, and you will move forward with it. You will learn to accept that this is part of your life, that grieving is part of your life now. The second thing is that God is faithful to the end. Went to a worship night the other day, and God just spoke clearly to me of I was faithful to her, and I am faithful to her now. It doesn't just stop, especially if you're a Christian. Life doesn't just stop here. Now it's going to take a really long time for you to get there, at least for my story. I really do believe that even though I want her back every day, that the best for her was to be with Jesus. She would have hated going through chemotherapy. Depends on your story, but he is faithful no matter what, and he will continue to be faithful to you. Remember clearly during that season, the Lord said, hey, you're going through this fire, but you will not smell like smoke. And that just meant, like, in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like, he's in it. He will lead you through it if you let him. It's okay to be mad at God, and it's okay to stay mad at God for a long time, but he's the one that will lead you through it till the end.
As we wrap up today's episode, we are grateful you join us to explore what it means to remain connected to God, to yourself, and to others. To stay updated on future episodes, be sure to hit that subscribe button and connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Remain Connected. Counseling appointments can be made at RemainConnectedLLC.com. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, may you find peace in your connections and blessings in every step of your journey. Have a blessed day.